When my father disinherited me at that dinner table, I felt a silence louder than any insult. That night still echoes in my mind like a faded, painful photograph one, where the edges curl and the colors bleed. I remember sitting there, glass of Chardonnay trembling slightly in my hand, while my father, Robert, and my two brothers, Brandon and Jason, laughed at me like I was some kind of joke. The clinking of cutlery and the murmurs from the other guests faded into a dull hum as their words cut sharper than any knife. They called my career a hobby. My years in biotechnology, the sleepless nights in labs, the sacrifices they saw, none of it. Just a frivolous pastime. Something to mock. My father's voice was cold and final when he declared I was disinherited, and the estate would pass solely to my brothers. No hesitation. No room for appeal. Just like that, I was erased from the family legacy. But that moment of humiliation was short-lived, even though it felt eternal. I knew something they didn't, and that knowledge changed everything. The scent of fresh pine and soft vanilla candles filled the room where my family had gathered. The dining room table was heavy oak, polished to a dull shine, strewn with plates of roasted lamb, buttered asparagus, and mashed potatoes dotted with chives, an old family tradition. The clatter of forks and murmured laughter underlined the kind of warmth that, at first glance, fooled outsiders into thinking we were a close-knit family. But underneath the surface, something was fractured like cracks beneath a beautiful glaze. My father, Robert, was the kind of man who commanded a room with his presence. Tall, gray-haired, with steel blue eyes that missed nothing. He'd built the family business from the ground up, or at least, that's the story he told everyone. My brothers, Brandon and Jason, mirrored him in ambition, if not in subtlety. They had inherited his charm, but not his patience. And me? I was Claire, the youngest daughter, who dared to chase a different dream. Instead of suits and meetings, my world was microscopes and gene sequences. I was the science geek, the dreamer, the one who got lectured about wasting time on a career that wouldn't make her rich. Biotechnology was my passion, yes, but also my rebellion, a way to carve out my own identity apart from the shadow of my family name. The irony was, the work I loved was on the verge of changing the world. Days before that dinner, life felt deceptively normal. I just wrapped up a meeting with my research team at the biotech firm I helped found. The air in the office smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, a smell that had become oddly comforting over the years. My phone buzzed with messages from investors excited about our latest breakthroughs, and my heart swelled with pride at the thought of what we were building. At home, my apartment was a sanctuary from the chaos, a cozy space filled with books, a few plants struggling to thrive in the winter light, and the soft hum of classical music drifting from my speakers. I had plans that stretched far beyond the next quarter or fiscal year. I wanted to leave a mark that wasn't just about money, but about legacy in a different form. But beneath that calm surface, there was always a shadow when family was concerned. Invitations to dinners or events came with unspoken expectations I could never quite meet. That night, the tension was almost tangible when I arrived at my father's estate. The heavy front door smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. My brothers greeted me with forced smiles, their eyes cold beneath the surface. The clinking of glasses and polite chatter surrounded me as I took my seat. My father wasted no time. "So, Claire," he began, voice smooth but dripping with disdain. "How's that little science project of yours going? Still playing with test tubes and petri dishes?" I forced a smile. "It's not just a project, Dad. Our work in gene therapy could revolutionize treatment for rare diseases." Brandon snorted from across the table. "Gene therapy? Sounds like a hobby for rich kids with too much time on their hands." Jason chimed in. "Yeah, Claire. Maybe you should focus on something practical, like running the family business." I looked to my father, hoping for some support, but his face was unreadable. Cold. Robert leaned back, taking a slow sip of wine. "Claire, this isn't a business. It's a hobby, and hobbies don't get an inheritance." A hush fell over the room. I remember the way my chest tightened, the taste of bile rising as the words hit me. Disinherited. Cast aside like I was nothing. "You're making a mistake," I said quietly. "I've spent my life building something real, something sustainable." He smiled, but it was the smile of a man who had already decided my fate. "Your brothers will carry on the family legacy. You were never meant to." The dinner continued in a blur of accusations, snide remarks, and dismissive laughter. I wanted to disappear, to run away from their venomous judgments, but I stayed, holding on to a secret I hadn't shared, a secret that would turn their world upside down. Later, when I was alone in my car outside the estate, the cold night air seeped through the windows, and I pulled out my phone. My nephew Liam had sent me a message earlier, a screenshot from Forbes' real-time billionaire list. There, in bold letters, was my name. Claire Matthews. Net worth, $5.8 billion. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The same family that mocked my hobby had no idea their empire was crumbling. Their wealth, built on shaky foundations of debt and foreclosures, was a fragile illusion. The truth was, I'd known for years that my father's business was sinking under the weight of bad loans and risky gambles. I watched from the sidelines as their empire teetered, while I quietly built something real. And now, I held the key to the family's downfall and my freedom. The morning after that brutal dinner, I woke to the hum of my apartment light filtering softly through the curtains, the faint scent of brewed coffee lingering from the night before. I reached for my phone, eyes immediately drawn to the screen. A flood of notifications, messages, and emails congratulating me on the Forbes listing. My net worth was now public knowledge, and the world, it seemed, was paying attention. But inside me, the feeling was bittersweet. Pride, yes. Relief, absolutely. But also a heavy weight of anger and betrayal that still lingered from the night before. I thought about my father, Robert Matthews, the man who taught me to believe in hard work but refused to see mine as anything more than a girl's folly. His booming voice, the sharp glint in his eyes as he dismissed everything I'd built. It was all so clear now. And my brothers, Brandon and Jason, so eager to claim their inheritance, so ready to cut me out. I remembered Brandon's smug smirk when he said my work was a hobby, and Jason's cold stare that said, "You don't belong here." I ran my fingers over the cool glass of my coffee mug, thinking back to the early days. Growing up, the Matthews household was filled with noise, loud conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the constant presence of power. My father ruled the house like a king, his word final on everything from business deals to family vacations. My brothers thrived in that environment, chasing the same dreams of wealth and status he'd instilled in them. But I was different. While they played sports and planned boardroom takeovers, I was lost in books about genetics and molecular biology. I remember the smell of old lab manuals and the scratch of pen on paper as I took notes late into the night. My parents, especially Dad, didn't understand that science was too complicated or not the right kind of work for their daughter. Still, I pushed on. My small victories, publishing papers, winning grants, launching my startup felt like quiet rebellions against the family expectations. I was carving a path far from the boardroom drama and hollow social events. At work, my colleagues' voices were softer, kinder, filled with hope. We were working on something that mattered, developing therapies that could change lives, not just line pockets. But back then, I told myself it was enough to be different, to be successful on my own terms. I never expected the family to turn against me like this. The first cracks appeared months ago, subtle but unmistakable. I remember the dinner when Brandon casually remarked, "You're never going to make real money with that science stuff. You should think about settling down and helping with the business." Jason laughed, nudging Dad, who just shook his head, muttering something about lost causes. Their voices carried the usual tone, mocking, but with a layer of disappointment, as if I had failed them by simply not fitting their mold. At first, I brushed it off. Family banter? Jealousy? Maybe. But the words stung, echoing in my mind long after the meal ended. Then, the invitations became fewer. Phone calls went unanswered. My ideas were dismissed or ignored in family meetings. The subtle exclusion morphed into open disdain. I tried to ignore the signs, to focus on my work, but the distance grew wider each day. One afternoon, I found Brandon scrolling through my social media profile on his phone during a family lunch. The look on his face was a mixture of surprise and something like envy. "What's so interesting?" I asked. He shrugged but didn't look up. "Just curious how you're still pretending your little project matters." That was the moment I realized they hadn't just underestimated me, they were threatened by me. And then came the night of the dinner, the culmination of months of quiet contempt. The room was heavy with tension, the air thick with the smell of roast and wine. My father's words hit me like a hammer. "You're disinherited, Claire. Your brothers will carry on the family name. Your biotech work is nothing more than a hobby." The phrase echoed in my ears, mingling with the shocked gasps around the table. I wanted to scream, to argue, to make them see me not as a disappointment, but as the woman I had become. But instead, I sat in stunned silence, heart pounding, trying to hold myself together. That night, as I sat alone in my car outside the estate, Liam's message was like a lifeline. He had always been the one family member who saw me not for my failures, but for my potential. A bright-eyed kid with a quiet curiosity and a heart bigger than his years. The screenshot on his phone was a validation not just of my success, but of my worth. I had crossed a threshold they thought I never would. The next morning, armed with that knowledge, I began to dig deeper. I knew the Matthews empire was built on shaky ground. Dad's public image was flawless, a titan of industry, a man who made deals with a flick of his hand. But behind closed doors, The truth was uglier. I accessed financial reports, foreclosure notices, and debt filings that revealed a crumbling foundation. The business was bleeding money, kept afloat by risky loans and empty promises. And my brothers? They were too blinded by entitlement to notice or care. That's when I made my decision. I could step in, bail out the family business, and play the game their way. I could accept the insult, swallow my pride, and keep the peace. Or I could expose the truth and walk away. The weight of that choice settled on me like a storm cloud, but I felt a strange clarity. It was time to stop pretending, time to reclaim my dignity, time to build a legacy on my own terms. I arranged a meeting with Liam the next day at a quiet cafe, the kind where the air smells like fresh coffee and soft jazz hums in the background. Liam was already there when I arrived, a nervous excitement in his eyes as he slid his phone across the table, showing me the latest financial documents I'd uncovered. He looked up, voice tentative but determined. Aunt Claire, Dad, and Uncle Brandon, they've been living in denial. They don't see it yet, but this is going to fall apart. I nodded, feeling a swell of protectiveness and pride. Liam was only 18, but he had the clarity that many adults lacked. We talked for hours. About the family, about betrayal, about futures. I promised him 2 things. 1, that I would protect him from the chaos. And 2, that I would set up an educational trust, something solid and real. Unlike the crumbling empire his father and uncles had built, back at home, I stared at the ceiling, the hum of the city filtering through the window. My thoughts were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and resolve. I thought of my father's cold dismissal, the sneers of my brothers, and the way they tried to erase me. But more than that, I thought of myself the girl who had dared to dream differently, who had spent years building a future on her own terms. I wasn't just the disinherited daughter. I was a woman with billions in her name, a future in her hands, and I wasn't going to let them define me. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. My father's lawyer called me the next morning, his tone polite but firm. "Claire, your father insists you reconsider your position. The family business could use your help." I smiled to myself. "Help? After the way they treated me?" "I'm sorry," I replied calmly, "but I'm not interested in salvaging what's already broken." That's when I decided to go public. I drafted a statement not angry or bitter, but clear and factual. I exposed the true state of the Matthews family business. The hidden debts, the foreclosures, the bankruptcy looming just beneath the surface. I made it clear I would not be a part of a legacy built on deception and greed. And I announced the establishment of the educational trust for Liam and other young people who deserved a better chance than I'd had. The fallout was immediate. Family friends whispered. Business partners pulled back, and the Matthews name was suddenly associated with scandal rather than prestige. My father's empire, once untouchable, was unraveling, but I felt no glee in their downfall. Only a quiet satisfaction that truth had finally been spoken. In the weeks that followed, my brothers reached out tentative, regretful. Brendan left a voicemail, voice shaky. "Claire, maybe we were wrong." Jason sent a text, brief and to the point. "Can we talk?" But I knew some wounds ran too deep for easy forgiveness. I replied with kindness but kept my distance. My life was no longer tied to their approval. I turned my energy toward what mattered. My company, my team, my work. The labs were alive with possibility, filled with the soft buzz of machines and the excited chatter of scientists who believed in what we were doing. I spent late nights reviewing data, meeting with investors, and planning the next phase of our research. And all the while, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I even started mentoring young women in STEM, sharing my story not as a tale of wealth, but of resilience and self-worth. I told them, "You don't need anyone else's approval to be extraordinary. Your work, your passion, that is your inheritance." One afternoon, Liam visited me at the office, eyes wide with admiration. "Thanks, Aunt Claire. You didn't just save me. You showed me what it means to stand up for yourself." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "Remember, Liam, your value isn't defined by family names or money. It's defined by who you are and what you stand for." Looking back now, I realized that night at the dinner table was a turning point. A painful moment that cracked open the old story and made space for a new one. One where I am not defined by their judgments or their limits, but by my courage, my vision, and my heart. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the blinds as I sat at my desk. A quiet hum of the city outside mingling with the gentle clatter of my keyboard. I'd just finished drafting a letter to the shareholders of the Matthews family business, a letter that was both a reckoning and a farewell. It wasn't easy, laying bare the truth about my father's empire, the debts, the looming bankruptcy, the reckless mismanagement. But honesty was the only way forward. I owed that much to myself, to Liam, and to anyone caught in the wake of their downfall. My phone buzzed a message from Liam. "Thanks for fighting for me." The words filled me with a profound sense of purpose. The fallout from my public statement was swift and far-reaching. Media outlets picked up the story. Headlines flashing accusations and questions about the Matthews family legacy. Social media buzzed with speculation and judgment. And inside the family, the tension grew thick like storm clouds. My brother's attempts at damage control felt desperate and hollow. They reached out, trying to patch things up. But their words rang false against years of dismissiveness and disdain. One evening, Brandon called. "Claire, we can fix this together. Please." I listened patiently, then replied with calm resolve. "I'm not here to fix the past, Brandon. I'm here to build a future. One without the mistakes we've made." In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work and my vision for what was next. The educational trust I established for Liam and other promising young minds became my new legacy project, a way to ensure that the next generation could pursue their dreams without the obstacles I had faced. I found peace in the quiet moments between meetings. The scent of coffee brewing, the soft scratch of pen on paper, the gentle hum of lab equipment reminders that I was creating something real and lasting. One afternoon, Liam came to visit my office. His eyes were bright with hope and something deeper gratitude. "You changed everything for me, Aunt Claire," he said softly. I smiled, feeling the warmth of connection that had been absent for so long. "You remind me why this matters, Liam. It's not about money or family names, it's about who we choose to be." I often think back to that night, the cold, polished dining room where my father dismissed my life's work and disinherited me. At the time, it felt like a death sentence, a closing of a door I'd fought so hard to open. But now, I see it differently. That moment was not an end, but a beginning. My success wasn't a spiteful rebuttal to their prejudice. It was proof that strength and dignity come from believing in yourself, even when others don't. I learned that family can sometimes be the hardest place to find acceptance, but also that freedom comes when you stop seeking it there. The world outside is full of people waiting for validation from family, from society, from anyone who will give it. But real freedom? It's in owning your story, your dreams, and your worth. Weeks after my public statement, the Matthews family business was unraveling in ways no one could have predicted. Banks froze accounts, partners backed out, and creditors circled like vultures. But I felt strangely removed from the chaos, as if I had stepped out of a storm and found a calm shore. Still, every message from Brandon or Jason reminded me of the fractured bonds I'd left behind. Their desperation leaked through texts and calls, each one a thinly veiled attempt to drag me back into their collapsing world. One rainy afternoon, I found myself staring out the window of my office, the soft patter of rain against the glass matching the rhythm of my thoughts. The weight of their rejection, the sting of years of condescension, it all surfaced again. But this time, I didn't feel powerless. I felt resolved. Then, Liam's voice broke through the silence. "Aunt Claire, can I ask you something?" His question came after a long pause on the phone. "Anything," I replied. "Do you ever miss them? Your family, I mean." I thought for a moment. The scent of rain hung in the air, and I could hear the soft rustling of leaves outside. "I miss the idea of family," I said honestly. "The support, the love, the belonging. But sometimes, the people we're born to aren't the ones who truly hold us." Liam was silent for a moment. "Will you still be my family?" he asked quietly. I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest. "Always." In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild on my terms. I opened the doors of my biotech company wider, inviting young talent, especially women, and those who had been overlooked. The labs buzzed with energy and purpose. I felt a sense of belonging there that I had never quite found at family dinners. At home, I planted a small herb garden on my balcony. Basil, rosemary, mint the smell of fresh earth and green leaves grounding me after long days. One evening, I received an unexpected invitation. A letter, embossed with the Matthews family seal, arrived at my door. My father was hosting a private gathering, a sort of final attempt at reconciliation. I held the envelope in my hands, feeling the weight of old wounds and new boundaries. I knew the truth was not a weapon to wield for vengeance, but a shield to protect what I'd built. When I arrived, the grand estate felt colder than I remembered. The halls echoed with silence rather than laughter. My father greeted me with a nod, his eyes tired but softer. "Claire," he said, voice low. "I was wrong. I see that now." I studied him, the man who had been both my greatest obstacle and, unknowingly, my greatest teacher. "I'm not the daughter you wanted," I replied quietly. "But I am who I am, and that's enough." Brandon and Jason watched, uncertain, perhaps beginning to grasp the cost of their pride. That night, I realized forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or accepting their mistakes. It was about freeing myself from their shadow. I left the estate feeling lighter, no longer tethered to a family that tried to define me but chose instead to stand tall in my own truth. The weeks after that, An easy reunion unfolded like the slow unfurling of a new chapter. The Matthews estate, once a symbol of power and control, began to crumble publicly and privately. News outlets reported on the bankruptcy filings and mounting debts with a mix of fascination and pity. My father's empire, built on sand, was finally giving way to the tide of reality. Yet, amid the external collapse, I felt a strange sense of peace. The toxic web of manipulation and disdain that had bound me for so long was unraveling, and with it came a freedom I had only dreamed of. At the same time, Liam's trust fund started to take shape, an educational foundation dedicated to nurturing curious minds. A beacon for those eager to learn but held back by circumstance. I worked closely with Liam, guiding him through the early stages, proud to see his spark of ambition grow brighter each day. One afternoon, as we walked through the local library, Liam turned to me, eyes shining with possibility. "Aunt Claire, this means everything. You didn't just save me from their world, you gave me wings." His words were a balm to wounds I hadn't fully acknowledged. The girl who once sat in labs, feeling invisible, now stood as a guardian for others like Liam, ready to break cycles of neglect and disappointment. But the journey wasn't without its shadows. My brother's bitterness lingered in the background, and their attempts to reconcile often felt like hollow gestures. Brandon once sent a handwritten letter, his words dripping with regret but lacking the sincerity I needed to heal. Jason's silence was perhaps the loudest rebuke of all. Still, I refused to let their bitterness poison my spirit. At work, my company thrived. We pushed forward with groundbreaking research, the hum of innovation a constant companion. The scent of sterile labs and fresh paper mingled with the quiet excitement of discovery. My team, diverse, passionate, and fearless, became my new family. I found solace in these moments, the flicker of hope in a colleague's eyes, the soft click of a microscope lens, the steady rhythm of progress. In the quiet evenings, I often sat on my balcony, watching the city lights twinkle beneath the dark sky. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and rain-soaked earth. I thought about the path I had traveled from that painful dinner, where my family tried to break me, to this moment of quiet triumph. It wasn't the life I'd imagined, but it was mine, and I was proud. One day, a journalist asked me, "Claire, what's the biggest lesson you've learned through all of this?" I paused, the memories flooding back. "Sometimes," I said softly, "the people closest to us can't see our worth, but that doesn't mean we don't have it. The real power is in believing in yourself when no one else will." The months following the public unraveling of my family's empire felt like waking up from a long, suffocating dream. I had finally stepped out of the shadow that Robert Matthews cast over every room, every conversation, every expectation. And though the silence left in his wake was vast, it was filled with space to breathe, to heal, to grow. I spent those days building a new rhythm, one defined not by the weight of my family's judgment, but by the lightness of my own purpose. Each morning began with the soft hum of the city outside my window, the smell of freshly brewed coffee curling through my apartment. I slip on my running shoes and take quiet walks through the neighborhood, letting the cool air fill my lungs and clear my mind. At work, the lab was a sanctuary. The soft glow of monitors, the gentle click of pipettes, and the murmur of focused voices created a symphony of hope and possibility. Every breakthrough was a reminder that I was creating something lasting, something meaningful. My team and I poured our hearts into research that could transform lives, particularly in rare diseases that had been neglected for far too long. Liam continued to be my beacon. Watching him grow, his curiosity, resilience, and kindness reminded me why I fought so hard. The educational trust flourished, granting scholarships, funding projects, and mentoring young talents who, like me, dared to dream beyond their circumstances. One afternoon, Liam surprised me with a drawing. He'd made a sketch of a tree with deep roots and strong branches. Beneath it, he'd written, "For Aunt Claire, who taught me to grow." Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged him. "You've taught me just as much, Liam." Though the distance from my father and brothers remained, I felt no bitterness. Instead, I carried a quiet grace, an understanding that sometimes people cannot change, and sometimes we must choose our own peace over their approval. I often reflect on that night, the disinheritance, the laughter, the cold dismissal. It was a wound that cut deep, but it also cracked open the door to something greater. The lesson I carry now is this: our worth is not determined by the acceptance of others, especially not family. It is forged in the fires of self-belief and nurtured by the courage to walk away from what harms us. Thank you for walking with me through this story, one of pain, courage, and ultimately, freedom. Family can be a source of our greatest joy, but also, sometimes, our deepest wounds. It's not easy to face rejection from those we love, especially when it comes wrapped in years of condescension and dismissal. But here's the truth I've learned. Our value isn't set by the people who doubt us or try to define us. It's found within, in the quiet moments when we choose to believe in ourselves despite the noise. If you're carrying the weight of family disappointment or feeling invisible in your own story, I want you to know you are not alone. There is power in stepping away from toxicity and choosing your own path no matter how hard that road may seem. So, I ask you, have you ever had to break free from a family that didn't see your worth? What did you learn about yourself in the process? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. If this story touched you, consider subscribing for more real, heartfelt stories that explore the complicated beauty of family, strength, and survival. Remember, your story matters. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away to find your own light.